The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. It's been 2 years since John Rustad parted ways with the BC United Party over differences about climate change science. The reason for his removal from the party, Kevin Falcon is quoted as saying, is because climate change is one of the most critical threats facing our future. And he added, Rustad does not speak on behalf of caucus on this issue. Well, 6 months later, John Rustad took over the leadership of the BC Conservative Party. At the time, the party was without a single sitting member in the legislature. Today, there are 4, and Rustad and his Conservatives are soaring in the polls. So who is John Rustad, and what is his vision for British Columbia should he do the seemingly impossible and win the next election? I invited John Rustad to join me for a conversation that matters about his agenda for British Columbia. John, welcome.
Thanks very much for having me on.
It's an odd turn of events in your life that you have wound up in this position where not only have you taken over the mantle of leadership of the Conservative Party, but you now see your political fortunes soaring. How did this happen?
Well, it depends on how far back you want to go, I guess, to start. But ultimately, I was never really interested in politics. Many years ago, I was doing lots of field work, working in the woods, did things like firefighting, worked, of course, in a little tie mill, had an accident actually in a tie mill with a chainsaw, which was one of those moments that kind of switched me a little bit in directions. And from that, I ended up starting my own company, ran providing geographic information systems analysis work to the resource sector, primarily forestry. Did that for a while. And in the year 2000, I thought this province was just going so sideways under the NDP. I sat down with my wife and said, what do you think about moving to Alberta? And we had a long talk. I mean, obviously I was running the company at the time, and my whole family was in Prince George. Her parents were in Prince George, and I had a number of other business interests. And so we decided to stay in BC. Well, that left me with 2 choices. Do I just live with it or try to change it? And that ultimately led me into politics. And I decided, from that, I kind of thought, I discovered I actually kind of enjoy politics. So I stayed as being a politician, was elected as a school trustee for 3 years, and elected provincially in 2005. And I've been representing the area ever since 2005.
Well, you had a stint as a minister along the way while sitting in government. And then you remained on even though the party lost, and then ran for re-election again, falling in under Kevin Falcon when he assumed the mantle of the BC Liberal Party. Was it apparent to you early on that there was going to be friction between you and Mr. Falcon?
No, Kevin and I worked with him from 2005 to 2013. We had a reasonable working relationship. Same with after the election. I told him, look, I'm not going to create any fuss. Obviously, you're now the leader. We'll do what we can to work together. But what ended up happening through that period of time, 2022 was a pretty tough year for my family. My father died in January. My father-in-law died in February. I had shingles in April, and my mother died in July. And I sat down with Kim and I thought, I don't need to be doing this. Should I just retire? And so we had a long conversation about that. But ultimately what ended up happening is the federal government put out a paper called the Farm Emissions Reduction Strategy, which talked about reducing or eliminating use of nitrogen-based fertilizer and stopping cows from farting and belching, because somehow that was going to change the weather. And I thought of thinking about it. First of all, this is going to have a pretty negative impact on my riding, because 35% of my riding is agriculture-based. But 40% of the world's food supply comes from using nitrogen-based fertilizer. So we're talking about significantly reducing food production, which of course would drive up prices. And I thought, this doesn't make any sense. So I tried to have this conversation within the BC Liberals at the time, BC United, of course, now. And they were kept putting it off and refused to have this conversation. So in August, I decided to just put out a retweet of a Patrick Moore tweet, which questioned the role of CO2. Anyway, this created all the fuss. Ultimately, I had a conversation with Kevin Falcon, and he asked me to take it down. He said, "You're not allowed to do this." And I said, "Look, Kevin, I've been trying to have this conversation. It's an important conversation for my riding." And he said, "Nope, you have to parrot our party lines or you can't be part of our caucus." And I said to him, "I'm sorry, but I was elected to represent my riding. I was elected to fight for the people in my riding." So he said, fine, hung up on me, and half an hour later I was kicked out of caucus. And that then left me with that same situation where I started thinking, okay, what am I going to do? It was the same thing back in 2000, what got me into politics. As I sat down with my wife and talked about, I'm not happy with where things are going. Do I leave politics? I could retire, or what do I do? And she said, no, you can't do that. We've got this mess. You've got to step up to the plate on this. And I said, well, this means, I'm going to be on the road a lot. I'm not going to be home. She said, I've got your back. I want you to do this. You need to do this for the province. So I said, okay. So that's when I started exploring what the path would be, and ultimately led me to joining the Conservative Party of British Columbia.
That call from Kevin Falcon came on your birthday, didn't it?
It did, actually. It was, they were trying to get a hold of me actually the day before. I was taking the day off because it was my birthday the next day, and it was mid-August, right? I mean, typically you take some downtime during that time. And so I had arranged that night before to talk to him on that day. But yeah, I was kicked out of the BC Liberal Party, now BC United Party, on my birthday. And coincidental, I suppose.
Well, you got kicked out because you dared to talk about something that is a bit of a sacred cow these days.
Well, in my perspective is we should always be fighting for our riding. We should always be fighting for the things that matter, for the people that elected you to represent you. And it's actually one of the principles I have now in the Conservative Party, is I've told all of our candidates that they will take a pledge on the first day of the election, that their number one priority will always be representing their riding, speaking on behalf of the riding, and voting on behalf of the riding. And it's an important distinction with the other parties, because they want to have people that are simply going to parrot their party lines. And how can you possibly think that 93 people around the province would all have the same thing to say? They're all going to be different. They're all going to have different priorities, and it's okay to have those differences.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. When you first made that move to take on the leadership of the Conservative Party, I think most people were looking at you going, well, that's a nice send-off to the sunset of your career. But it's gone in ways that nobody could have anticipated. The support that you've been receiving, has it been coming to you directly, or do you believe that you're also riding on some of the coattails of what seems to be the wave of support following Mr. Poilievre?
It's interesting. Mr. Poilievre, of course, was quite popular and in place, having that support before I joined the Conservative Party of British Columbia. And the Conservative Party in British Columbia was around 3 or 4% in the polls. So, and of course, now we're challenged for government, depending on which poll you're looking at. We're 38 to 40% in the polls. So I think there's no question that what the federal Conservatives have done is sort of open the door. But what I hear the most in British Columbia is people step up to the plate and are saying, thank God we finally have an option. The people were tired of the 16 years of BC Liberal. They're tired of the 17 years of NDP. We're in a crisis in just about everything you look at in this province, and people really want change. They want that common sense change in British Columbia, and I think that's what we've tapped into. So sure, there's some overlap. People want change federally as well, but ultimately, people are really excited about having that option in British Columbia now.
So how do you define what is the option between you and the NDP?
Well, it's a very good question. Lots of people ask that, and I look at what the NDP stand for. So, for example, the NDP want to take away your democratic rights to make decisions locally with local governments on your official community plans, your democratic right to actually have input through that. And I disagree with that fundamentally. We should be supporting democracy. We should be supporting local governments in that decision making. We need to figure out how we work together to bring some changes, but it shouldn't be through an authoritarian approach. David Eby very much believes in a very strong socialist approach to government. He doesn't believe in parents' rights. I believe very strongly that parents should have a right to know what's going on with their kids and what's happening in our education system. David Eby believes in the sexualization of kids in our schools. And I think that's fundamentally wrong. Our schools should be teaching kids how to think, not what to think. David Eby also, is very strongly against our resource sector. He's put in all kinds of barriers and structure in place. I'm very much in favor of having a strong resource sector to be able to generate the revenues we need for things like healthcare. David Eby actually argued in court back about a year and a half ago that the healthcare system was more important than patient suffering. And I think that's completely wrong. The healthcare system, it's not about the system, it's about the patients. Our whole system, our whole healthcare should be about providing services for patients. There's so many more things that I could go into. For example, this spring, we moved forward a piece of legislation in a private member's bill saying that we wanted to make sure there was fairness for women and girls in sports, that biological men should not be competing against women in sports. There needs to be safe places for women and girls. They wouldn't even let it on the floor. They voted it down at first reading. So there are very distinct differences between what we are proposing for British Columbia and what David Eby stands for.
Let's talk about the economy, because I think that there's not been much of a focus on what's happening economically in British Columbia. You take a look at the Standard & Poor's and Moody's rating based on our last budget that was delivered, and it's as though there is not complete disregard for fiscal responsibility, but it's not high on the priority list. And I can't help but think that so many of the driving factors behind the budget that has been put forward is a lack of understanding of how you build an economy so that you can keep the provincial government appropriately funded.
So, they're running a 10% deficit. It's the largest deficit in BC's history, both last year, this year, and every year going forward. It's even larger than when we locked down the economy in 2001. It's hard to believe that there's that much irresponsibility in their spending. They've taken the provincial budget from $53 billion to $89 billion, 70% increase in spending. They've taken the public service from about 270,000 to about 400,000 people. That's almost a 50% increase. Can anybody say that our services, our economy have improved by 50%? But you're absolutely right about the economic situation in BC. Nobody wants to invest in this province. We're driving out our forest sector. We've got so much potential in mining. We've got potential in all of our resources. We've got potential even in technology and other types of things in our economy. But we've had such a negative environment in this province that people don't want to bring money here. Canfor, for example, was planning to build a $200 or $250 million project in my riding in Houston. And after the proposed land changes, which is basically going to say that the province is no longer the final decision maker on anything that goes on in the landscape, Canfor just said, we got to put this on hold. We don't know what that world is going to look like under the NDP. And so you create that kind of negative environment, you're not going to get investment. Same thing with housing, with the investments that's needed in our housing sector. You've got people that have assembled land packages, and that because it takes so long to get permitting, they're saying the economics aren't there anymore. I can't go ahead with this project. We have 17 mines in BC that are either permitted or about to be permitted. That represents a $38 billion investment, will create between 20 and 30,000 new jobs, and add over $800 billion to British Columbia's GDP. And yet, what does the NDP do? They created a plan to develop a critical minerals strategy that then they can drive other plans that eventually they'll get to a place where they approve a mine. We've got to cut out all of that nonsense and actually get to building British Columbia again, get to creating those jobs. Because at the end of the day, it's about the average everyday person, right? The person that is wanting to put food on the table, that's struggling to pay their rent, that wants to maybe have a dream to buy a home, or maybe put a little bit of money away for their future, or perhaps even want to raise a family in this province. That dream is gone. People no longer have that opportunity in this province, and that's what needs to change. We have to get our economy going. We have to create that dream again, that British Columbia can be the place to be able to come and build a future in.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. So David Williams has wondered out loud, the economist with Business Council BC, about how difficult it is to change the way in which the machinery of government is now working, because it's been slowly tinkered with over this many years. And he says it's like you've got sand in the gears of the machinery of government. How do you go about changing that? Like, because you've got all these people who are working in the public, service, who were part of making those changes. And if you take over as leader, they're going to be working for you. How do you get them to change the way in which they do things so that it encourages investment and helps to, in the words of Joe Siegel, kind of lift the saran wrap off the economy so that it can breathe?
Yes. Well, that's a very good point that was put forward, and you do get some of that entrenching that happens. But I also believe in people. I believe that, people want to do the right thing, and ultimately, should we have that honor of forming government in October, there will be an expectation for a significant change. There will be an expectation that we do take that approach, that we strip things down to just the basics, that we bring in common sense in this province. And so obviously there's going to be some shifts that are going to be needed within the public service. But I think, they're professionals. They will step up to the plate in terms of what we want to do. But we are going to need to be very strong. Should we have that honor, my ministers are going to have a lot of work to do. They're going to need to know their files. They're going to need to be able to push back. They're going to need to make sure that we can drive this agenda. Because we don't have forever. People are leaving this province. People, a third of British Columbians are wondering whether they should move to another jurisdiction. We should have that land of opportunity, and so we will build that. And we will tear down some of these structures that are in place that are preventing us from being able to do it. We have to do it. It's the right thing to do for people in this province. And I think people are counting on us to be able to actually achieve that.
So one of the other big challenges is how do we deal with the lack of appropriate responsiveness in healthcare? Like, there are some elements, there's no doubt about it, of our healthcare system, you go, they work great. And then there's a whole bunch that don't. And at the same time, we decide that we're going to stand in the way of any kind of so-called private insurance, despite the fact that there's 6 or 7 different levels of access to healthcare that the average person doesn't have access to.
I tell you, we're going to need a half an hour just to talk about this topic alone, but I'll breeze over in terms of what we need to do. So the biggest challenge that we've got when you look at the healthcare system is what countries in the world are following what we do. The only one that comes close is North Korea. And that's not exactly a very good sign that we're on the right track. So let's look at some of the models that are much more successful, that have much better, much lower wait times, that have much better access to services, various types of things. And so we're looking at those models, particularly the European models, things like Australia, Sweden, right? These types of models that are universal healthcare, that are delivered by multiple sources, whether it's public or private. And to you as the consumer, you wouldn't see the difference. But we're able to harness the abilities of our healthcare professionals. I'll give you an example. There's a surgeon who gets 8 hours of surgery time a week. He could very easily be doing 20, 30, or 40 hours of surgery time, but that's all he gets within the system. And he doesn't even get to do that over a full day. He comes in and often it starts late. He's working through his surgery around 1:30 in the afternoon. An administrator comes in and says, "You're going to be done by 4, right? If you're not, there's going to be problems. There'll be penalties." So he's got to make a decision about wrapping up that surgery and looking at the next surgery. And if there's any complications, can I get it done by 4? That's about a system. That's not about servicing a patient. And so we need to be able to change the system to be able to make sure patients are at the center of it.
But do you have the authority to do that? Does not the Canada Health Act get in the way of being able to make some of these changes that you're talking about?
It doesn't, because we can do all of this under the Canadian Health Act because it's universal health care. So you're not paying to jump a queue, you're not paying for private service. It is a single payer, but it's provided from multiple sources. So we should be able to do this within the Canadian Health Act.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. Another topic that is of constant interest, especially in the last few years, is how are we going to deal with chronic drug use, the opioid crisis, but crime in general. Where do we go from from where we are right now?
Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to stop giving fentanyl to kids, right? We need to stop this decriminalization experiment. I mean, Bonnie Henry, the agent of David Eby, was just the other week out in Ottawa arguing that they needed to double down on this course and double down on what's called safe supply and fentanyl and all the, and crack cocaine and methanol and like all of these things. Like, forget it. Safe supply is not safe. It's very dangerous. We need to end that experiment. We need to end this decriminalization. We're taking tools away from police to actually create a civil society. And to me, that's just wrong. What we need to do is we need to take things like safe injection sites and turn them into recovery intake sites. Make sure that we build out everything from doctor-prescribed treatment to short-term recovery, to long-term recovery, to involuntary recovery, to long-term care. There's a wide range of services that we need to build out so that we can actually make a difference and get people to a place where they are on a path for recovery as opposed to just giving them drugs and keeping them high.
It's not an easy task.
No, it's not.
And as you pointed out, you're on the other side of the virtually every single one of these issues, and yet you're seeing a growing wave of support. What do you think is the underlying reason why people are now gravitating towards what your message is?
Well, they're frustrated and they're looking for hope. Where we are polling strongest is with 18 to 35. Because as I mentioned, right, you get somebody who's working one job or they're working two jobs, they're struggling to put food on the table and pay their rent. They want to have hope to be able to build a future. I've got people that I know that have come over from India to build a home and a future here in British Columbia. They've been here 20 years and they're frustrated and saying, I'm actually thinking about moving back to India. British Columbia is that melding pot of different cultures and peoples and faiths, and it's the place of promise. People who've come here all of their lives, all of our history, they've come here because the hope for being able to have a better future, and that's now lost. So we need to change that, and I think that's what people are gravitating to when they're coming to the Conservative Party, is they're looking and saying, we need to do things differently. We need to be able to bring common sense back. We need to have a government that's just going to stand for what's right and fight for the average everyday person. And that's why I think people are coming over and supporting the Conservative Party in BC, because we are not going to do politics as normal.
There's a number of people worried that for wanting a voice that is different than the current government, the only way that you could see a change in government is if you were to somehow figure out a path towards reconciliation with BC United. Is that even remotely possible now?
We've tried over this past year. We were told where to go and how to get there by the leader of the BC United Party. We were told that they would be dictating the terms. I mean, there isn't any realistic concept on their side, acceptance of what is actually happening in the public and their desire for change. And they also don't recognize that they have been part of the problem. I mean, 16 years of BC Liberal and 17 years of NDP have created the situation that we are facing today. So my perspective is we are always open to working with anybody that wants to come in and be part of what we're doing in BC. As I say, it's not about being conservative or liberal or NDP or Green. It's just standing for what's right and fighting for the average everyday person. And so we've got lots of people from the NDP that have come over and joined us. Matter of fact, we've got a former NDP MLA running for us. We've got even some people from the Green Party that come over and have said to me, thank you for being such a big tent that we can be part of what you're trying to do in BC. Federal Liberal, Federal Conservative, we're building that true coalition. And we're continually reaching out and saying, come be part of what we're doing. Come be part of building this future for British Columbia. And so my hope is that we're going to see more and more of that happening. But at a party level, I don't think there's an opportunity, but ultimately it's the people of British Columbia that I think that have to come together to make the decision to end sort of these radical policies of David Eby and support a party that's going to bring the significant change and that common sense back.
So just one other thing that I'm curious about, I guess the bylaws or constitution of the BC Conservative Party are different than that of, let's say, BC United or NDP, in the sense that each riding is its own authority in essence. They don't fall under a provincial party system. What are the benefits and drawbacks to that system?
So there is the ability for local ridings to be able to have their own constitution, but it still has to fit under the Conservative Constitution. The Conservative Constitution is still the overarching. And so when you put the structure in place, for example, for nominations and elections and all that kind of stuff, that still supersedes over top of the riding associations, but they do have that ability within inside. So it's a complex structure that's in place. It's one of those things that I think, quite frankly, we need to look at. It's something that I inherited from many years gone by of this party. But as we grow this party, we'll be looking at how we make sure we run this party as efficiently as possible, similar to what we want to do within government, is to make sure that we keep it straightforward and very focused on what we need to be doing. One of the things I want to change forever in BC is how politics is done. So political parties like to work in the shadows. They like to give you spin. They don't want you to have facts because they want to be able to try to convince you of their way of thinking. I want to change that. I want to take freedom of information and throw it out the door. I want to make sure that everything that can be made public will be made public, so that you will be able to judge a political party based on the facts and how they're reacting to it, as opposed to based on their spin. And we can do that in British Columbia, and it would change the way politics works in this province forever.
Well, thank you for coming in and having this conversation with me, giving me some insights into how you are actually a different voice or a different perspective. I wish you great success.